testimony of Michael Cohen, former attorney to President Donald Trump.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order.
You'll state your point of order.
Rule 9F of the committee rules say that any testimony from your witness needs to be here 24 hours in advance. The committee, the chairman knows well that at 10:08 we received the written testimony, and then we received evidence this morning at 7:54. Now, if this was just an oversight, Mr. Chairman, I could look beyond it. But it was an intentional effort by this witness and his advisors to once again show his disdain for this body. And with that, I move that we postpone this hearing.
I want to thank the gentleman. Let me say this, that we got the testimony late last night. We did. And we got it to you all pretty much the same time that we got it. I want to move forward with this hearing.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, this is a violation of the rule, and if it was not intentional, I would not have a problem. I'm not saying it was intentional on your part. I'm saying it's intentional on his part, because Mr. Dean, last night on a cable news network, actually made it all very evident. John Dean, and I'll quote, Mr. Chairman, he said, as a former committee counsel in the House Judiciary Committee and then a long-term witness, sitting alone at the table is important. Quote, holding your statement as long as you can so the other side can't chew it up is important as well, close quote. And so it was advice that our witness got for this particular body. And Mr. Chairman, when you were in the minority, you wouldn't have stood for it. And I can tell you that we should not stand for it as a body.
Let me say this.
Chairman?
Let me say this.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Katie Hill.
I move to table.
Mr. Chairman?
Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I was asking to be recognized before the motion.
The vote is so in tabling the motion.
You know who had this
to
material
postpone.
before all the
Excuse
members
me,
of the committee?
Excuse me.
CNN had it before
Sir.
we did. CNN had the exhibits
Sir.
before we did. I just want to be recognized.
Yeah, well, the vote is on tabling the motion to postpone. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it.
I appeal the ruling of the chair. Yes, I can assure you it's in the rules. I appeal the ruling of the chair.
Do the rules matter, Mr. Chairman?
Move to
Recognize
table.
the gentlelady.
Move to waive the rules.
There's a motion to
Move
table.
to table.
Chairman.
The vote.
Move
She
to
made
table.
two motions. What's the motion?
The vote is on tabling.
I move to table the appeal to the ruling of the chair.
The vote is on that. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it.
I ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Mr. Cummings votes yes. Ms. Maloney. Ms. Maloney votes yes. Ms. Norton. Ms. Norton votes yes. Mr. Clay. Mr. Clay votes yes. Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch votes yes. Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper votes yes. Mr. Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes yes. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes yes. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes yes. Mr. Ruda. Mr. Ruda votes yes. Ms. Hill. Ms. Hill votes yes. Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes yes. Mr. Sarbanes. Mr. Sarbanes votes yes. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch votes yes. Ms. Spear. Ms. Spear votes yes. Ms. Kelly. Ms. Kelly votes yes. Mr. DeSaulnier. Mr. DeSaulnier votes yes. Ms. Lawrence. Ms. Lawrence votes yes. Ms. Plaskett. Ms. Plaskett votes yes. Mr. Khanna. Mr. Khanna votes yes. Mr. Gomez. Mr. Gomez votes yes. Ms. Acacia-Cortez. Ms. Acacia-Cortez votes yes. Ms. Presley. Ms. Presley votes yes. Ms. Tlaib. Ms. Tlaib votes yes. Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Amash. Mr. Amash votes no. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Meadows.
No.
Mr. Meadows votes no. Mr. Heiss.
No.
Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman.
No.
Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Comer.
No.
Mr. Comer votes no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Gibbs. Mr. Gibbs votes no. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman votes no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy votes no. Ms. Miller. Ms. Miller votes no. Mr. Green. Mr. Green votes no. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe. Mr. Stubbe votes no. On this vote, we have 24 yeses, 17 noes.
Motion to table is agreed to. Let me say this. You've made it clear that you do not want the American people to hear what Mr. Cohen has to say. But the American people have a right to hear him. So we're going to proceed. The American people can judge his credibility for themselves. Now,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
we did not say that. We just said we wanted to follow the rules. He didn't say stop the hearing. He just said postpone it so we could get his testimony and the exhibits when we were supposed to get them according to the rules of this committee. That's all we said. We didn't say we didn't want to hear from the guy. We just said we
Reclaiming my
want to follow
time.
the rules.
Reclaiming my time. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Today, the committee will hear the testimony of Michael Cohen, President Donald Trump's longtime personal attorney and one of his closest and most trusted advisors over the last decade. On August 21st, Mr. Cohen appeared in federal court and admitted to arranging secret payoffs of hundreds of thousands of dollars on the eve of the election to silence women alleging affairs with Donald Trump. Mr. Cohen admitted to violating campaign finance laws and other laws. He admitted to committing these felonies, quote, in coordination with and at the direction of, unquote, President Trump. And he admitted to lying about his actions to protect the president. Some will certainly ask if Mr. Cohen was lying then, why should we believe him now? This is a legitimate question. As a trial lawyer for many years, I've faced this situation over and over again, and I ask the same question. Here is how I view our role. Every one of us in this room has a duty to serve as an independent check on the executive branch. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in search of the truth. The president has made many statements of his own, and now the American people have a right to hear the other side. They can watch Mr. Cohen's testimony and make their own judgment. We received a copy of Mr. Cohen's written statement late last night. It includes not only personal eyewitness accounts of meetings with Donald Trump as president inside the Oval Office, but it also includes documents and other corroborating evidence for some of Mr. Cohen's statements. For example, Mr. Cohen has provided a copy of a check sent while President Trump was in office with Donald Trump's signature on it. to reimburse Mr. Cohen
Oh, by the
for the
way,
hush money payment
so
to
another
Stormy
absolute
Daniels.
epic part of the testimony.
This new evidence raises
Whether direct evidence.
a host
Russia, remember that
of
telling
troubling
us this is the most
legal
trusted
and ethical
person. This
concerns
guy, for the
about the
bodies,
president's actions
he'll say he
in the
does not
White
have
House
direct evidence,
and
but
before.
suspicions.
Would you also
That's
get
great.
the floor, please?
It's fucking great, man.
Thank you. This check is dated August 1st, 2017. 6 months later, in April of 2018, the president denied anything about it. In April of 2018, President Trump was flying on air at Fort Drum when a reporter asked
Video
him the
volume still needs
question,
to go up.
did you know about a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? The answer was, quote, no. A month after that, the president admitted to making payments to Mr. Cohen, but claimed they were part of a, quote, a monthly retainer, unquote, for legal services. This claim fell apart in August when federal prosecutors concluded, and I quote, in truth and in fact, there was no such retainer agreement, end of quote. Today, we will also hear Mr. Cohen's account of a meeting in 2016 in Donald Trump's office, during which Roger Stone said over speakerphone that he had just spoken with Julian Assange, who said there would be a, quote, massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign, end of quote. According to Cohen, Mr. Trump replied, quote, wouldn't that be great, end of quote. The testimony that Michael Cohen will provide today, ladies and gentlemen, is deeply disturbing, and it should be troubling to all Americans. We will all have to make our own evaluation of the evidence and Mr. Cohen's credibility. As he admits, he has repeatedly lied in the past. I agree with Ranking Member Jordan that this is an important factor we need to weigh, but we must weigh it and we must hear from him. But where I disagree fundamentally with the ranking member involves his efforts to prevent the American people from hearing from Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen's testimony raises grave questions about the legality of President Donald Trump's conduct and the truthfulness of statements while he was president. We need to assess and investigate this new evidence as we uphold our constitutional our oversight responsibilities. And we will continue after today to gather more documents and testimony in our search for the truth. I had made it abundantly clear to Mr. Cohen that if he comes here today and he does not tell us the truth, I will be the first one to refer those untruthful statements to DOJ. So when people say he doesn't have anything to lose, he does have a lot to lose if he lies. And the American people, by the way, voted for accountability in November. And they have a right to hear Mr. Cohen in public so they can make their own judgments. Mr. Cohen's testimony is the beginning of the process, not the end. Ladies and gentlemen, the days of this committee protecting the president at all costs are over. They're over. Before I close, I want to comment about the scope of today's hearing. At the request of the House Intelligence Committee, and my very good friend, Adam Schiff, Congressman Adam Schiff, the chairman, I intended, over the objections of the ranking member of our committee, to limit the scope of today's hearing to avoid questions about Russia. However, Mr. Cohen's written testimony, in his written testimony, he's made statements relating to Russia. And these are topics that we understand do not raise concern from the Department of Justice. So in fairness to the ranking member and all committee members, we will not restrict questions relating to the witness's testimony or related questions he is willing to answer. Finally, I remind members that we will need to remain mindful of those areas where there are ongoing Department of Justice investigations. Those scoping limitations have not changed. Finally, and to Mr. Cohen, Martin Luther King, Mr. Cohen, said some words that I leave with you today before you testify. He said, faith is taking the first step, even when you can't see the whole staircase. There comes a time when silence becomes betrayal. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that truly matter. In the end, he says, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And with that, I yield to the distinguished gentleman, the ranking member of our committee, Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
To the point that
Mr. Jordan is recognized. Mr. Jordan is recognized for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, here we go. Here we go. Your first big hearing, your first announced witness, Michael Cohen. I want everyone in this room to think about this. The first announced witness for the 116th Congress is a guy who is going to prison in 2 months for lying to Congress. Mr. Chairman, your chairmanship will always be identified with this hearing. And we all need to understand what this is. This is the Michael Cohen hearing presented by Lanny Davis. That's right. Lanny Davis choreographed the whole darn thing. The Clintons' best friend, loyalist, operative, Lanny Davis put this all together. You know how we know? He told our staff. He told the committee staff. He said the hearing was his idea. He selected this committee. He had to talk Michael Cohen into coming. And most importantly, he had to persuade the chairman to actually have it. He told us it took 2 months to get that job done, but here we are. He talked him into it. This might be the first time someone convicted of lying to Congress has appeared again so quickly in front of Congress. Certainly, it's the first time a convicted perjurer has been brought back to be a star witness in a hearing. And there's a reason this is the first, because no other committee would do it. Think about this. With Mr. Cohen here, this committee, we got lots of lawyers on this committee. This committee is actually encouraging a witness to violate attorney-client privilege. Mr. Chairman, when we legitimize dishonesty, we delegitimize this institution. We're supposed to pursue the truth, but you have stacked the deck against the truth. We're only allowed to ask certain questions. Even with that amendment you just told us about, well, Russia's now on the table. You initially told us we can't ask questions about the special counsel, can't ask questions about the Southern District of New York, can't ask questions about Russia. Nope. Nope. Only subjects we can talk about are ones you think are going to be harmful to the President of the United States. And the answers to those questions are going to come from a guy who can't be trusted. Here's what the U.S. Attorney said about Mr. Cohen. While Mr. Cohen enjoyed a privileged life, his desire for ever greater wealth and influence precipitated an extensive course of criminal conduct. Mr. Cohen committed four distinct federal crimes over a period of several years. He was motivated to do so by personal greed and repeatedly used his power and influence for deceptive ends. But the Democrats don't care. They don't care. They just want to use you, Mr. Cohen. You're their patsy today. They got to find somebody, somewhere, to say something so they can try to remove the president from office. Because Tom Steyer told him to. Tom Steyer, last week, organized a town hall. Guess where? Chairman Nadler's district in Manhattan. 2 nights ago, Tom Steyer organized a town hall. Guess where? Chairman Cummings' district in Baltimore. The best they can find to start this process, Michael Cohen. Fraudster, a cheat, convicted felon, and in 2 months a federal inmate. Well, actually, they didn't find him. Laney Davis found him. I'll say one thing about the Democrats. They stick to the playbook. Remember how all this started. The Clinton campaign hired Perkins Coie law firm, who hired Glenn Simpson, who hired a foreigner, Christopher Steele, who put together the fake dossier that the FBI used to go get a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. But when that whole scheme failed and the American people said, we're going to make Donald Trump president, they said, we got to do something else. So now, Clinton loyalist, Clinton operative Laney Davis has persuaded the chairman of the Oversight Committee to give a convicted felon a forum to tell stories and lie about the President of the United States so they can all start their impeachment process. Mr. Chairman, we are better than this. We are better than this. I yield back. Actually,
I wanted to note.
Mr. Chairman, actually, I have a motion.
Back.
I have a motion.
Gentleman is not recognized.
I have a motion under Rule 2K6 of Rule 11.
You yielded back, sir. You yielded back.
Mr. Chairman, you took 7 minutes. I took 4.
Well, the gentleman yielded back.
That's how you're going to operate? First, you don't follow the rules, and now you're going to say, so you don't get, you get to,
point of order.
you get to deviate from the rules.
Regular order.
I just have a simple motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
It's
I wanted
regular
to
order to
note-
have the testimony
excuse me.
24 hours in advance.
Excuse me. I wanted to note
addressed that.
under Rule 11, Clause 4, all media and photographers must be officially credentialed to record these proceedings and take photographs. I also wanted to briefly address the spectators in the hearing room today. We welcome you and we respect your right to be here. We also ask in turn for your respect as we proceed with the business of the committee today. It is the intention of the committee to proceed without any disruptions. Any disruptions of this committee will result in the United States Capitol Police restoring order and that protesters will be removed, and we are grateful for your presence here today and your cooperation. Now I want to welcome Mr. Cohen and thank him for participating in today's hearing. Mr. Cohen, if you would please rise and I will begin to swear you in. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative, and thank you, and you may be seated. The microphones are sensitive, so please speak directly into them. Without objection, your written statement will be made a part of the record. With that, Mr. Cohen, you are now recognized to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Is your mic on?
Yes. Chairman Cummings, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. I have asked this committee to ensure that my family be protected from presidential threats and that the committee be sensitive to the questions pertaining to ongoing investigations. I thank you for your help and for your understanding. I am here under oath to correct the record, to answer the committee's questions truthfully, and to offer the American people what I know about President Trump. I recognize that some of you may doubt and attack me on my credibility. It is for this reason that I have incorporated into this opening statement documents that are irrefutable and demonstrate that the information you will hear is accurate and truthful. Never in a million years did I imagine when I accepted a job in 2007 to work for Donald Trump, that he would one day run for the presidency, to launch a campaign on a platform of hate and intolerance, and actively win. I regret the day I said yes to Mr. Trump. I regret all the help and support I gave him along the way. I am ashamed of my own failings and publicly accepted responsibility for them by pleading guilty in the Southern District of New York. I am ashamed of my weakness and my misplaced loyalty, of the things I did for Mr. Trump in an effort to protect and promote him. I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat. He was a presidential candidate who knew that Roger Stone was talking with Julian Assange about a WikiLeaks drop on Democratic National Committee emails. And I will explain each in a few moments. I am providing the committee today with several documents, and these include a copy of a check Mr. Trump wrote from his personal bank account after he became president to reimburse me for the hush money payments I made to cover up his affair with an adult film star and to prevent damage to his campaign. Copies of financial statements from 2011, 2012, and 2013 that he gave to such institutions such as Deutsche Bank. A copy of an article with Mr. Trump's handwriting on it that reported on the auction of a portrait of himself that he arranged for the bidder ahead of time and then reimbursed the bidder from the account of his nonprofit charitable foundation, with the picture now hanging in one of his country clubs. And copies of letters I wrote at Mr. Trump's direction that threatened his high school, colleges, and the college board not to release his grades or SAT scores. I hope my appearance here today, my guilty plea, and my work with law enforcement agencies are steps along a path of redemption that will restore faith in me and help this country understand our president better. And before going further, I want to apologize to each member, to you as Congress as a whole. The last time I appeared before Congress, I came to protect Mr. Trump. Today, I am here to tell the truth about Mr. Trump. I lied to Congress when Mr. Trump stopped negotiating the Moscow Tower project in Russia. I stated that we stopped negotiating in January of 2016. That was false. Our negotiations continued for months later during the campaign. Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates. In conversations we had during the campaign, at the same time I was actively negotiating in Russia for him, he would look me in the eye and tell me there's no Russian business, and then go on to lie to the American people by saying the same thing. In his way, he was telling me to lie. There were at least a half a dozen times between the Iowa caucus in January of 2016 and the end of June when he would ask me, "How's it going in Russia?" referring to the Moscow Tower project. You need to know that Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Tower negotiations before I gave it. So to be clear, Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it. He lied about it because he never expected to win. He also lied about it because he stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars on the Moscow real estate project. And so I lied about it too, because Mr. Trump had made clear to me, through his personal statements to me, that we both knew to be false, and through his lies to the country, that he wanted me to lie. And he made it clear to me because his personal attorneys reviewed my statement before I gave it to Congress. Over the past 2 years, I have been smeared as a rat by the President of the United States. The truth is much different. And let me take a brief moment to introduce myself. My name is Michael Dean Cohen, and I am a blessed husband of 24 years and a father to an incredible daughter and son. When I married my wife, I promised her that I would love her, I would cherish her, and I would protect her. As my father said countless times throughout my childhood, you, my wife, and you, my children, are the air that I breathe. So to my Laura, and to my Sammy, and to my Jake, there's nothing I wouldn't do to protect you. I have always tried to live a life of loyalty, friendship, generosity, and compassion. It's qualities my parents ingrained in my siblings and me since childhood. My father survived the Holocaust, thanks to the compassion and selfless acts of others. He was helped by many who put themselves in harm's way to do what they knew was right. And that is why my first instinct has always been to help those in need. And Mom and Dad, I am sorry I let you down. As the many people that know me best would say, I am the person that they call at 3 a.m. if they needed help. And I proudly remember being the emergency contact for many of my children's friends when they were growing up, because their parents knew that I would drop everything and care for them as if they were my own. Yet last fall, I pled guilty in federal court to felonies for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in coordination with individual number one. And for the record, individual number one is President Donald J. Trump. It is painful to admit that I was motivated by ambition at times. It is even more painful to admit that many times I ignored my conscience and acted loyal to a man when I should not have. Sitting here today, it seems unbelievable that I was so mesmerized by Donald Trump that I was willing to do things for him that I knew were absolutely wrong. For that reason, I have come here to apologize to my family, to my government, and to the American people. Accordingly, let me now tell you about Mr. Trump. I got to know him very well, working very closely with him for more than 10 years as his executive vice president and special counsel, and then as personal attorney when he became president. When I first met Mr. Trump, he was a successful entrepreneur, a real estate giant, and an icon. Being around Mr. Trump was intoxicating. When you were in his presence, you felt like you were involved in something greater than yourself, that you were somehow changing the world. I wound up touting the Trump narrative for over a decade. That was my job. Always stay on message. Always defend. It monopolized my life. At first, I worked mostly on real estate developments and other business transactions. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Trump brought me into his personal life and private dealings. Over time, I saw his true character revealed. Mr. Trump is an enigma. He is complicated, as am I. He is both good and bad, as do we all. But the bad far outweighs the good. And since taking office, he has become the worst version of himself. He is capable of behaving kindly, but he is not kind. He is capable of committing acts of generosity, but he is not generous. He is capable of being loyal, but he is fundamentally disloyal. Donald Trump is a man who ran for office to make his brand great, not to make our country great. He had no desire or intention to lead this nation, only to market himself and to build his wealth and power. Mr. Trump would often say, this campaign was going to be the greatest infomercial in political history. He never expected to win the primary. He never expected to win the general election. The campaign, for him, was always a marketing opportunity. I knew early on in my work for Mr. Trump that he would direct me to lie to further his business interests. And I am ashamed to say that when it was for a real estate mogul in the private sector, I considered it trivial. As the president, I consider it significant and dangerous. But in the mix, lying for Mr. Trump was normalized, and no one around him questioned it. In fairness, no one around him today questions it either. A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee emails, ahead of time. And the answer is yes. As I earlier stated, Mr. Trump knew from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks drop of emails. In July of 2016, days before the Democratic convention, I was in Mr. Trump's office when his secretary announced that Roger Stone was on the phone. Mr. Trump put Mr. Stone on the speakerphone. Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange, and that Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days, there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Mr. Trump responded by stating to the effect, "Wouldn't that be great?" Mr. Trump is a racist. The country has seen Mr. Trump court white supremacists and bigots. You have heard him call poorer countries shitholes. In private, he is even worse. He once asked me if I could name a country run by a black person that wasn't a shithole. This was when Barack Obama was president of the United States. And while we were once driving through a struggling neighborhood in Chicago, he commented that only black people could live that way. And he told me that black people would never vote for him because they were too stupid. And yet, I continued to work for him. Mr. Trump is a cheat. As previously stated, I am giving to the committee today 3 years of Mr. Trump's personal financial statements from 2011, 2012, and 2013, which he gave to Deutsche Bank to inquire about a loan to buy the Buffalo Bills and to Forbes. These are Exhibits 1A, 1B, and 1C to my testimony. It was my experience that Mr. Trump inflated his total assets when it served his purposes, such as trying to be listed amongst the wealthiest people in Forbes, and deflated his assets to reduce his real estate taxes. I'm sharing with you 2 newspaper articles, side by side, that are examples of Mr. Trump inflating and deflating his assets, as I said, to suit his financial interests. These are Exhibit 2 to my testimony. As I noted, I'm giving the committee today an article he wrote on and sent to me that reported on an auction of a portrait of Mr. Trump. This is Exhibit 3A to my testimony. Mr. Trump directed me to find a straw bidder to purchase a portrait of him that was being auctioned off at an Art Hamptons event. The objective was to ensure that this portrait, which was going to be auctioned last, would go for the highest price of any portrait that afternoon. The portrait was purchased by the fake bidder for $60,000. Mr. Trump directed the Trump Foundation, which is supposed to be a charitable organization, to repay the fake bidder, despite keeping the art for himself. And please see Exhibit 3B to my testimony. And it should come as no surprise that one of my more common responsibilities was that Mr. Trump directed me to call business owners, many of whom are small businesses that were owed money for their services, and told them that no payment or a reduced payment would be coming. When I asked Mr. Trump, or when I told Mr. Trump of my success, he actually reveled in it. And yet, I continued to work for him. Mr. Trump is a con man. He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair and to lie about it to his wife, which I did. And lying to the First Lady is one of my biggest regrets because she is a kind, good person, and I respect her greatly, and she did not deserve that. And I'm giving the committee today a copy of the $130,000 wire transfer from me to Ms. Clifford's attorney during the closing days of the presidential campaign that was demanded by Ms. Clifford to maintain her silence about her affair with Mr. Trump. And this is Exhibit 4 to my testimony. Mr. Trump directed me to use my own personal funds from a home equity line of credit to avoid any money being traced back to him that could negatively impact his campaign. And I did that too, without bothering to consider whether that was improper, much less whether it was the right thing to do or how would it impact me, my family, or the public. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later. As Exhibit 5A to my testimony shows, I am providing a copy of a $35,000 check that President Trump personally signed from his personal bank account on August 1st of 2017, when he was President of the United States, pursuant to the cover-up, which was the basis of my guilty plea to reimburse me, the word used by Mr. Trump's TV lawyer for the illegal hush money I paid on his behalf. This $35,000 check was one of 11 check installments that was paid throughout the year while he was president. Other checks to reimburse me for the hush money payments were signed by Donald Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg. And see for example 5B. The President of the United States thus wrote a personal check for the payment of hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws. And you can find the details of that scheme directed by Mr. Trump in the pleadings in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. So picture this scene. In February of 2017, 1 month into his presidency, I'm visiting President Trump in the Oval Office for the first time, and it's truly awe-inspiring. He's showing me all around and pointing to different paintings, and he says to me something to the effect of, "Don't worry, Michael, your January and February reimbursement checks are coming." They were FedExed from New York, and it takes a while for that to get through the White House system. As he promised, I received the first check for the reimbursement of $70,000 not long thereafter. When I say con man, I'm talking about a man who declares himself brilliant, but directed me to threaten his high school, his colleges, and the college board to never release his grades or SAT scores. As I mentioned, I'm giving the committee today copies of a letter I sent at Mr. Trump's direction threatening these schools with civil and criminal actions if Mr. Trump's grades or SAT scores were ever disclosed without his permission. And these are under Exhibit 6. The irony wasn't lost on me at the time that Mr. Trump, in 2011, had strongly criticized President Obama for not releasing his grades. As you can see in Exhibit 7, Mr. Trump declared, "Let him show his records," after calling President Obama a terrible student. The sad fact is that I never heard Mr. Trump say anything in private that led me to believe he loved our nation or wanted to make it better. In fact, he did the opposite. When telling me in 2008 or 2009 that he was cutting employees' salaries in half, including mine, he showed me what he claimed was a $10 million IRS tax refund. And he said that he could not believe how stupid the government was for giving someone like him that much money back. During the campaign, Mr. Trump said that he did not consider Vietnam veteran and prisoner of war Senator John McCain to be a hero because he likes people who weren't captured. At the same time, Mr. Trump tasked me to handle the negative press surrounding his medical deferment from the Vietnam draft. Mr. Trump claimed it was because of a bone spur, but when I asked for medical records, he gave me none and said that there was no surgery. He told me not to answer the specific questions by reporters, but rather offer simply the fact that he received a medical deferment. He finished the conversation with the following comment: "You think I'm stupid? I'm not going to Vietnam." And I find it ironic, Mr. President, that you are in Vietnam right now. And yet, I continue to work for him. Questions have been raised about whether I know of direct evidence that Mr. Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia. I do not. And I want to be clear, but I have my suspicions. Sometime in the summer of 2017, I read all over the media that there had been a meeting in Trump Tower in June of 2016 involving Don Jr. and others from the campaign with Russians, including a representative of the Russian government, and an email setting up the meeting with the subject line, "Dirt on Hillary Clinton." Something clicked in my mind. I remembered being in a room with Mr. Trump, probably in early June of 2016, when something peculiar happened. Don Trump Jr. came into the room and walked behind his father's desk, which in and of itself was unusual. People didn't just walk behind Mr. Trump's desk to talk to him. And I recall Don Jr. leaning over to his father and speaking in a low voice, which I could clearly hear, and saying, "The meeting is all set." And I remember Mr. Trump saying, "Okay, good, let me know." What struck me as I looked back and thought about the exchange between Don Jr. and his father was, first, that Mr. Trump had frequently told me and others that his son Don Jr. had the worst judgment of anyone in the world, and also that Don Jr. would never set up any meeting of significance alone, and certainly not without checking with his father. I also knew that nothing went on in Trump world, especially the campaign, without Mr. Trump's knowledge and approval. So I concluded that Don Jr. was referring to that June 2016 Trump Tower meeting about dirt on Hillary with the Russian representatives when he walked behind his dad's desk that day, and that Mr. Trump knew that was the meeting Don Jr. was talking about when he said, "That's good. Let me know." Over the past year or so, I have done some real soul searching, and I see now that my ambition and the intoxication of Trump power had much to do with the bad decisions, in part, that I made. And to you, Chairman Cummings and Ranking Member Jordan, and the other members of this committee, and the members of the House and Senate, I am sorry for my lies and for lying to Congress. And to our nation, I am sorry for actively working to hide from you the truth about Mr. Trump when you needed it most. For those who question my motives for being here today, I understand. I have lied, but I am not a liar. And I have done bad things, but I am not a bad man. I have fixed things, but I am no longer your fixer, Mr. Trump. And I am going to prison and have shattered the safety and security that I tried so hard to provide for my family. My testimony certainly does not diminish the pain that I have caused my family and my friends. Nothing can do that. And I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump. And by coming today, I have caused my family to be the target of personal, scurrilous attacks by the president and his lawyer, trying to intimidate me from appearing before this panel. Mr. Trump called me a rat for choosing to tell the truth, much like a mobster would do when one of his men decides to cooperate with the government. And as Exhibit 8 shows, I have provided the committee with copies of tweets that Mr. Trump posted, attacking me and my family. And only someone burying his head in the sand would not recognize them for what they are. It's encouragement to someone to do harm to me and my family. I never imagined that he would engage in vicious, false attacks on my family and unleash his TV lawyer to do the same. And I hope this committee and all members of Congress on both sides of the aisle make it clear that as a nation, we should not tolerate attempts to intimidate witnesses before Congress, and attacks on family are out of bounds and not acceptable. And I wish to especially thank Speaker Pelosi for her statements, and it's Exhibit 9, to protect this institution and me, and the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Adam Schiff, and you, Chairman Cummings, for likewise defending the institution and my family against the attacks by Mr. Trump, and also the many Republicans who have admonished the president as well. I am not a perfect man. I have done things I am not proud of, and I will live with the consequences of my actions for the rest of my life. But today, I get to decide the example.
Actually, that's kind of funny. He just told on himself, told on the Democrats. Actually, that's kind of funny. He just told on himself because the Democrats are protecting him.
And I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer the committee's questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. I now recognize myself. Mr. Cohen,
There's no telling what they gave him
I want to make sure you
for that testimony.
you have admitted lying to Congress, to this very body, and now you're going to prison for it. Do you, Mr. Cohen, recognize the gravity of your offenses? You are a lawyer, right?
As of yesterday.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a slideshow of all the documents that are going to be in this hearing.
I want you to really hear this, Mr. Cohen.
Some of them you haven't seen yet.
You will not tolerate lying to this Congress
Some of them you have seen.
by anybody.
Some of them they haven't gotten to yet.
You're in search of the truth.
So give me 1 second.
I do.
Now, the president has also made numerous statements that turned out to be inaccurate. For example, he said he knew nothing about the hush money payments to Ms. Clifford.
And while I'm doing this, if you notice before, if Cohen did state that the president never directed him to do anything at all. He kind of spoke in code with him, I guess.
You say he told you, and I quote, "Don't worry, Michael. Your January and February reimbursement checks are coming." Is that accurate? And was that in the Oval Office?
The statement is accurate, but the discussions regarding the reimbursement occurred long before he became president.
So I'm going to bring up these documents, and
2017, when actually I apologize.
I'm going to make a slideshow out of them, and they'll just continue to go through.
I was contacted by Keith Davidson, who is the attorney, or was the attorney for Miss Clifford, for Stormy Daniels. And after several rounds of conversations with him about purchasing her life rights for $130,000, what I did each and every time is go straight into Mr. Trump's office and discuss the issue with him. When it was ultimately determined, and this was days before the election, that Mr. Trump was going to pay the $130,000.
I don't think I downloaded that many.
In the office with me was Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. He acknowledged to Alan that he
showing 16, but
$30,000, and that Alan and I should
all right, I'm going to put them up there anyway.
Figure out how to do it. So yes, sir, I stand by the statement that I gave, but there was a history to it.
In your testimony, you said you bought some checks. Is that right? You said you bought some checks.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you about one of these. This from the Trump Trust that holds the president businesses. Can you tell me who signed this check?
I believe that the top signature is Donald Trump Jr. And the bottom signature, I believe, is Alan Weisselberg's.
And can you tell me the date of that check?
March 17th of 2017.
Now, wait a minute. Hold up. The date on the check is after President Trump held his big...
you will see that check.
Claiming that he gave up control of his businesses.
You will see that check in the photos that I have up.
Over the course of 12 months.
In the photos that I have up.
It was declared to be a retainer for services that would be provided for the year of 2017.
Was there a retainer agreement?
There is no retainer agreement.
Would Don Jr. or Mr. Weisselberg have more information about that?
Mr. Weisselberg, for sure, about the entire discussions and negotiations prior to the election, and Don Jr. would have cursory information.
Now, here's another one. This one appears to be signed by Donald Trump himself. Is that his signature?
That is Donald Trump's signature.
So let me make sure I understand. Donald Trump wrote you a check out of his personal account while he was serving as President of the United States of America to reimburse you for hush money payments to Ms. Clifford. Is that what you are telling the American people today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
One final question. The President claimed he knew nothing about these payments. His ethics filing said he owed nothing to you. based on your conversations with him, is there any doubt in your mind that President Trump knew exactly what he was paying for?
There is no doubt in my mind, and I truly believe there is no doubt in the mind of the people of the United States of America.
And these new documents appear to corroborate what you just told us. With that, I'll yield to gentleman from the gentleman and ranking member.
I will make sure that you and I meet one day while we're in the courthouse, and I will take you for every penny you still don't have, and I will come after your Daily Beast and everybody else that you possibly know. So I'm warning you, tread very effing lightly, because what I'm going to do to you is going to be effing disgusting. You understand me? Mr. Cohen, who said that?
I did.
And did you say that, Mr. Cohen, in your testimony on page 2? You said you did things for Mr. Trump in an effort to protect him. Was that statement that I just read that you admitted to saying, did you do that to protect Donald Trump?
I did it to protect Mr. Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, and Eric Trump.
And in your sentencing statement back in December in front of the judge, you said this, Mr. Cohen, my weakness can be characterized as a blind loyalty to Donald Trump, a blind loyalty that led me to choose a path of darkness. Is that accurate, Mr. Cohen?
I wrote that.
You wrote that and said that in front of the judge. Is that right?
That's correct.
Let me read a few other things here, and let me ask you why you did some of these things. When you filed a false tax return in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016, was all that out of blind loyalty to the president?
No, it was not.
When you failed to report $4 million in income to the Internal Revenue Service, did you do that to protect Donald Trump?
No, I did not.
And when you failed to pay $1.4 million in taxes, I got constituents who don't make that in a lifetime. When you failed to pay $1.4 million in taxes to the U.S. Treasury, was that out of some blind loyalty to the President of the United States?
It was not, but the number was 1.38 and change, and I have paid that money back to the IRS at this time.
I think the American people will appreciate that 1.3.
And I would also just like to say it was over a course of 5 years, approximately $260,000 a year.
Yeah, and that's what I said, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, that's 5 years.
Yes.
Got it. When you made false statements to financial institutions concerning a home equity line of credit, taxi medallions, and your Park Avenue apartment in 2013, 2014, and 2015, and you pled guilty to making those false statements to those banks, was that all done to protect the president?
No, it was not.
How about this one? When you created the fake Twitter account, Women for Cohen, and paid a firm to post tweets like this one, in a world of lies, deception, and fraud, we appreciate this honest guy at Michael Cohen, hashtag TGIF, hashtag handsome, hashtag sexy. Was that done to protect the president?
Mr. Jordan, I didn't actually set that up. It was done by a young lady that worked for Red Finch, and during the course of the campaign, which you would know gets somewhat crazy and wild, we were having fun. That's what it was, sir. We were having fun.
Was it done to protect the president?
That was not done to protect the president.
Was it a fake Twitter account?
That was, no, that was a real Twitter account. It exists.
You pay a firm to create this
I didn't
account,
pay the firm
Women
to
for
do
Cohen.
that. It was done by a young lady that works for the firm. And again, sir, we were having fun during a stressful time.
The point is, Mr. Cohen, did you lie to protect the president or did you lie to help yourself?
I'm not sure how that helped me, sir.
I'm not sure how it did either.
Right. And I would
point
like
is,
to
I
also
think-
note that more than half the people
And
on
here's
that
the
site
point.
are men.
Here's the point. Chairman just gave you a 30-minute opening statement, and you have a history of lying over and over and over again. And frankly, you don't have to take my word for it. Take what the court said. Take what the Southern District of New York said. Cohen did crimes that were marked by a pattern of deception and that permeated his professional life. These crimes were distinct in their harms, but bear a common set of circumstances. They each involved deception and were each motivated by personal greed and ambition. A pattern of deception for personal greed and ambition, and you just got 30 minutes of an opening statement where you trashed the President of the United States of America. Mr. Cohen, how long did you work for Donald Trump?
Approximately a decade.
10 years?
That's correct.
You said all these bad things about the President there in that last 30 minutes, and yet you worked for him for 10 years? All those bad things, I mean, if it's that bad, I can see you working for him for 10 days, maybe 10 weeks, maybe even 10 months. But you worked for him for 10 years. Mr. Cohen, how long did you work in the White House?
I never worked in the White House.
And that's the point, isn't it, Mr. Cohen?
No, sir.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not, sir.
You wanted to work in the White House.
No, sir.
You didn't get brought to the dance.
Sir.
And now?
I was extremely proud to be personal attorney to the President of the United States of America. I did not want to go to the White House. I was offered jobs. I can tell you a story of Mr. Trump reaming out Reince Priebus because I had not taken a job where Mr. Trump wanted me to, which is working with Don McGahn at the White House General Counsel's office.
Mr. Cohen, you work for the President.
Sir, one second. All right. What I said at the time, and I brought a lawyer in who produced a memo as to why I should not go in because there would be no attorney-client privilege. And in order to handle some of the matters
Alexandria
my opening,
Ocasio-Cortez is a freshman senator that is actually in the room right now. She is on the Insight Committee board, and I didn't know she was on that board, but yes, that makes a big difference.
Like Andy McCabe, like James Comey, same kind of selfish motivation after you don't get the thing you want. That's what I see here today, and I think that's what the American people.
Mr. Jordan, all I wanted was what I got, to be personal attorney to the President, to enjoy the senior year of my son in high school and waiting for my daughter who was graduating from college to come back to New York. I got exactly what I want.
Exactly what you want?
What I wanted. That's right.
Gentlemen,
I received exactly what I wanted.
Gentlemen's time has expired. Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, thank you for being here today. As you likely know, I served as the chair of the Democratic National Committee at the time of the Russian hacks and when Russia weaponized the messages that it had stolen. But I want to be clear. My questions are not about the harm done to any individual by WikiLeaks and the Russians. It's about the possible and likely harm to the United States of America and our democracy. I have a series of questions that I hope will connect more of these dots. Mr. Cohen, is it your testimony that Mr. Trump had advanced knowledge of the Russia WikiLeaks release of the DNC's emails?
I cannot answer that in a yes or no. He had advanced notice that there was going to be a dump of emails, but at no time did I hear the specificity of what those emails were going to be.
But you do testify today that he had advanced knowledge of their imminent release.
That is what I had stated in my testimony.
What they're trying to get at is if he actually had anything to do with it. Come to find out, he didn't have anything to do with the emails being released. He just knew that Julian Assange was going to release all the emails.
The company was
having that knowledge is not a crime.
Meant that the family was involved in the deal.
However, he did use those emails or Russia used those emails to further his campaign. However, that's no different than what any other senator does.
Based on your experience with the President and knowledge of his
at all.
relationship
That's no
with Mr.
different.
Stone, do you have reason to believe that the President explicitly or implicitly authorized Mr. Stone to make contact with WikiLeaks and to indicate the campaign's interest in the strategic release of these illegal
most during an election, even during Senate, Senate elections or your local elections,
or was he an agent of the
they
campaign
dig up
acting on behalf of the President
dirt on each other, and just because he knew about it beforehand and knew about it does not make what he did a crime.
President what he had done?
Correct.
He just gathered information just like any other senator would.
Happy to take his calls. It was free service.
Roger Stone says he never spoke with Mr. Trump about WikiLeaks. How can we corroborate what you are saying?
I don't know, but I suspect that the special counsel's office and other government agencies have the information that you're seeking.
Moving on to a little later in 2016, a major WikiLeaks dump happens hours after the Access Hollywood tape is released. Do you believe or are you aware of Mr. Trump coordinating or signaling for this email dump?
I am unaware of that. I actually was not even in the country at the time of the Billy Bush tape. I was in London visiting my daughter.
Knowing how Mr. Trump operates with his winning at all costs mentality, do you believe that he would cooperate or collude with the foreign power to win the presidency? Is he capable of that?
It calls on so much speculation, ma'am. It would be unfair for me to.
I understand,
give an
but you
answer
have
for
a
that.
tremendous amount of experience. Given
Mr.
what
Trump
you testified today.
is all about winning, and
And
he
in
will
your-
do what is
And
necessary
in
within
your
which to win.
opinion and experience, would he have the potential to cooperate or collude with the foreign
So,
power to
you know,
win the
Trump
presidency at
used
all costs?
what information he used to win the presidential election,
Based on what you know, Mr. Trump,
as Michael Cohen stated
about
prior
and coordinating with the Russians at any
when he
point
first started,
during the campaign.
President Trump never expected to win
Testimony.
the election, just as I've always said. He never expected.
Was there something odd?
He never expected to win. That's why he didn't have his cabinet set up during that year.
Yes.
During that,
Really sure that I can
when it
answer
come down
that
to the
question
primaries and the last two,
not part of the campaign. The other conversations that Mr. Trump had with
presidents to be elected, or during the vote,
so many
he didn't have his cabinet set up. He never expected to win.
to the same direction.
Finally, before my time expires, Mr. Cohen,
And
the campaign and the
to
entire
me, that's odd.
organization appears
When you
to
never
still-
expect to win, so you don't even set up your cabinet,
there are
and
Russian business
you win by
there are
the electoral college and not the popular vote.
There are
What do you
lies,
think
all
happened
those contexts.
with
And then we have Roger Stone.
the what do you think happened with the electoral voters?
That WikiLeaks was going to.
Nobody expected Trump to win. Everybody expected Hillary to be president. Everybody expected
stolen by
that.
Russia from the Democratic National Committee.
The gentle lady's time has expired. You may answer
So-
her inquiry.
My question is,
Quickly.
given all those connections,
It seems that
is it likely that
either
was fully aware
the hand of
and had
God
the
come
intent
down
of working with
and
Russia to
change the
help
electoral
make sure
voters'
that
minds,
win the presidency at all costs?
or
So let me say that this is a matter that's
something else
currently
happened.
being handled by
And I'm going to believe that something else happened.
select intelligence committees.
I'm going to believe that
Rather not
the electoral voters were paid into voting for him,
than just to
because
tell you that Mr.
you have to understand where those electoral voters come from.
would have him.
Those electoral voters come from,
And one other thing that I had said.
first of all, nobody knows who they are.
when it
Second
came
of all,
to
they're
the Trump
chosen
Tower
by the
myself,
respective political parties.
it was-
They are chosen by the Democrats. They are chosen by Republicans. They are chosen by the DNC. They are chosen by the PAC.
usual.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Great of Tennessee.
Thank you.
They're chosen by the
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Democratic National Committee. They are chosen by the Republican National Committee. Those people are in charge of
They've issued a gag order to try to
picking who runs as president or who they're going to endorse. You know, right now we have somewhere around 280 people right now today are running for president. And out of those 280,
to Congress.
somebody,
If you read the sentencing
the
report on Mr.
Republican
Miller,
National
like
Committee
second
and
greedy,
the DNC and the PAC, they're going to choose their president.
narcissist,
They're going to choose who they want to out of that, and then that's who those people are chosen for you. You don't get to choose; those people are chosen for you.
If the Democrats were after the truth,
and that's not right. It's not right that the electoral voters are chosen by the same political parties. Your presidents are chosen by the political parties. Per the Constitution, that's against the law.
The first topic in your limited scope that I can ask Mr. Cohen is about the president's
It's definitely against the law.
But, Mr. Chairman, didn't Mr. Cohen plead guilty to lying to banks about his personal finances? So we're asking a guy going to jail for lying about his debts to comment about the president's debts. He's the expert. Mr. Chairman, your next couple of topics say that I can ask Mr. Cohen about the president's compliance with financial disclosure and campaign finance laws, but didn't Mr. Cohen on 2 occasions break campaign finance law with his own donations? So again, the majority party's star witness on the president's compliance is a guy who broke compliance laws himself. Mr. Chairman, you graciously allow us to ask questions of Mr. Cohen on the president's dealings with the IRS and tax law. Your star witness here broke the law with regards to the IRS at least 5 times. He pled guilty on cheating on his taxes, lying to the IRS. He's the best witness you got. Next up, with the permission of the chairman, I get to ask Mr. Cohen about his perspective on the president's business dealings. Let me get this straight. The witness lied to multiple financial institutions to get loans to pay off other loans just to keep himself afloat, and he's going to be the expert on business practices. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, the witness may produce documents that he suggests incriminates the president, yet he lies to banks. All of those lies were done on fraudulent documents, documents that he forged. Nothing he says or produces has any credibility. Apparently, he even lied about delivering his own.
Right now, they're trying to prove that Michael Cohen is,
ladies and gentlemen, how on earth
has no credibility because he himself is a liar.
Self-serving fraud. It begs the question: what is the majority party doing here? No one can see this guy as credible. He will say whatever he wants to accomplish his own personal goals. He's a fake witness, and his presence here is a travesty. I hope the American people see through this. I know the people back in Tennessee will. And with that statement, sir, I have a few questions of the witness. With your loss of your law license, I think you mentioned in your opening statement that you had been disbarred. What is your source of income in the future?
I don't expect I'm going to have a source of income when I'm in federal penitentiary.
What, is there a book deal coming or anything like that?
I have no book deal right now in the process. I have been contacted by many, including for television, the movie. If you want to tell me who you would like to play you, I'm more than happy to write the name down.
I'm sure there's
I will also like to turn around and just to correct your statement on me. No.
Well, let me ask one other question, though. I only have a limited amount of time.
No individual.
One quick question. Who paid your expenses to be here today?
Who's paid my expenses?
To be here today.
I paid my expenses.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the remaining of my time to the ranking member.
Mr. Cohen, how many times did you talk to the special counsel's office?
7.
Did they talk to you at all?
I'm going to say the point of that was to see if the Democrats actually paid his expenses to be here. I'm sure he's rich and he has money.
Special counsel's office between sentencing and today.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand your question.
You talked to him 7 times. That's in the sentencing memorandums.
But as you saw in his testimony, Michael Cohen's testimony, he thanked Nancy Pelosi and Schumer and several other representatives from the Democratic Party.
One question.
I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
Mr. Maloney.
Well, I'll come back to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Cohen, in your 10 years of working for Donald Trump, did he control everything that went on in the Trump organization? And did you have to get his permission in advance and report back after every meeting of any importance?
Yes. There was nothing that happened at the Trump Organization, from whether it was a response as the Daily Beast story that you referred to.
As everyone knows, yesterday they had a closed-door meeting with Michael Cohen. I don't think that was right. Most people, most cities, they have closed-door meetings. That is not transparency to me.
I don't have the answer to that.
No government agency should have closed-door meetings unless it has something to do with the military, and that's what I believe. So the fact that they are having closed-door meetings for everything, I mean, how much more proof do you need that our government is abusing the powers they have? They are lacking transparency. They're lacking disclosure. Welcome to Disclosure TV.
That I extended on his behalf.
And
can you elaborate more?
Well, going back into the
and that's just ridiculous to me to have a government that blatantly goes to the media to say they are transparent, just as the same as whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. You know, the Republicans, they have closed-door meetings. The Democrats have closed-door meetings. And just as you heard last year during the Trump Pelosi Schumer meeting, they wanted to have a meeting behind closed doors when they were talking about the border wall. And then now you have the Democrats in public stating, oh, we need transparency. We need transparency. Transparency is what we need. But as you know, they only want transparency when it benefits them. And transparency needs to benefit all the people of the United States. And why people let the government do? Yes, I blame us, the citizens, for the lack of transparency in our government, because we actually have the power to change that, and we don't. We just let them do whatever they want. The reason our government is the way it is because of us. Catch and kill. We know what the government is doing is wrong. We know the power they have is too much power. We know they have power over the people, and it's getting worse, just like the red flag laws that are going into effect, where basically they're turning the United States into Nazi Germany all over again, and people are allowed to turn other people in. Basically, they're collaborators, and they're turning their neighbors in, and for having saying that they're dangerous, and then the police can turn around and come and take their guns. That's what the red flag law says, and that's all because of us. That's all because of the citizens of the United States. That's all because we listen to what's on the mainstream media. Well, you don't understand what's on the mainstream media is what they want us to know. They report to the mainstream media. They don't report to the citizens. The mainstream media thinks that they speak for us when it comes to transparency, and that's wrong.
Barry Levine of AMI as well.
And that shouldn't be that way. The media doesn't speak for the citizens. Now, you know, back in the 90s and 80s, it was okay. You had investigative journalists.
That you began work for the Trump Organization as a lawyer dealing with real estate transactions.
And they did their job, and they did what they were supposed to. Now, the media cares more about
determine your credibility here today. I just wanted to ask you a couple of
ads and making money than anything. And that was just as the CEO said of CNN. He said it just brought in a crap ton of money.
My question to you: was it Donald Trump's fault that you knowingly committed a crime of deception to defraud a bank?
No, it's not.
Was that fraudulent loan you obtained for the Trump Organization or for you personally?
It would be for me, though I'm not familiar with which loan that you're referring to. I would like to say one thing,
Mr.
sir.
Cohen,
Sorry, I would like just to respond. When
the loan that you pled guilty.
When we're talking about the home equity line of credit, which is what I believe you're referring to,
we're also referring, I'm going to ask a question pertaining to your summer home that you purchased,
I
too.
never purchased a summer home. No individual or no bank in the 22 years that I've had loans have ever lost a dollar with me. I owe no money to any bank.
Well, the banks usually find out if someone's trying to deceive them.
In 22 years, I have no money
loyalty,
that's ever been owed
Mr. Cohen,
to any individual
Mr.
or any bank.
Mr. Cohen, did your so-called blind loyalty to the president cause you to defraud the bank for your own personal gain?
Sir, I take exception to that because there has never been a fraud on I never defrauded any bank.
Well, let's dig a little deeper on that, on the bank fraud. According to the Southern District of New York, you failed to disclose more than $20 million in liabilities, as well as tens of thousands of dollars of monthly expenses. That's according to the Southern District of New York. Now, Mr. Cohen, you being a lawyer, surely you knew you were breaking the law. No, why would you have done that?
Sir, I'm not a CPA, and I pled guilty. I'm going to prison as a result of it.
Because you're a con?
No, sir.
Okay.
Because I pled guilty, and I am going to be doing the time. I have caused...
he keeps repeating the fact that he's going to prison. I don't know what that's about.
Let's go back to the one last question about the bank.
It's like he's saying, I don't need to answer your questions. I'm going to prison anyway.
You lied again to the bank. This is according to the Southern District of New York.
So,
and said it had been
if he's going to prison anyway,
shifted the debt to another bank.
And he's telling him I'm going to prison anyway, he wants to make a bit of difference. Whether I lie or whether I tell you the truth, I'm going to prison.
To defraud the bank was for the desire to purchase the summer home for $8.5 million?
No, sir. That would have been off of an equity line.
I'd like to know who signs the documents for that, actually.
And there was a pre-existing line of credit that existed years before the date that you're referring to, where this is
New
York City taxi medallion.
Because I'm pretty sure the Senate cannot. They don't have the authority to send people to jail. I guess the FBI would sign that, and then an actual judge somewhere would have to sign that order.
$20 million in liability.
But as far as the Senate goes,
worth over $45 million.
And that's kind of weird why the Senate is having a hearing while they are authorized to have a hearing. That's not a court. That's not the court system.
You calling, okay, well, no comment on that.
Right now, they are being the judges, and then they get a judge to sign off on him going to jail.
Capable of telling the truth. And I would hope that as this committee moves forward,
I think I need to look more into that because
to subpoena witnesses. We subpoena
he's not actually on trial for anything.
Recently disbarred, are not convicted felon, and witnesses that haven't committed bank fraud and tax fraud. That is how we're going to determine the truth. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
I think to jump for you. I would just make one point. We just had a 5-minute debate where Mr. Cohen disputes what the Southern District of New York found, what the judge found, that he was actually guilty of committing bank fraud. If this statement back here doesn't say it all, Cohen's consciousness of wrongdoing is fleeting, his remorse is minimal, his instinct is to blame others is strong. There's only one wrong with that statement. His remorse is non-existent. He just debated a member of Congress saying, I really didn't do anything wrong with the false bank things that I'm guilty of and going to prison for.
Mr. Jordan, that's not what I said, and you know that that's not what I said. I pled guilty, and I take responsibility for my actions. Shame on you, Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chair,
not what I said.
Mr. Chairman.
That's not what I said. What I said is I took responsibility, and I take responsibility. What I was doing is explaining to the gentleman that his facts are inaccurate. I take responsibility for my mistakes.
You know, I want to talk about those checks a minute. Cohen says that those checks were written to pay off Stormy Daniels and all that.
So before you turn around and you cast
now, there's no proof whatsoever that that's where those checks went to.
whole lot, but I made
or what those checks were for.
And I didn't fight with the.
He has checks, and he's saying that those checks are for the Stormy Daniels payoff. Those checks are for money for the campaign finance and all that.
Mr. Norton.
But those checks doesn't say
at the center of
what they're for.
The reasons you're going.
So basically, he can bring up any check he would want
for campaign finance
and say, "Hey, these are used for
and they center around
buying cocaine if he wanted."
Some salacious revelations. The Washington Post.
So I mean,
reported.
There's no proof in those checks that state that he done anything wrong. That's just his word against Trump's, and then he's using checks as evidence that, and then the evidence doesn't state what the checks were for.
Server.
They're using Michael Cohen's testimony as evidence as to what the checks were for. But on the checks, but that's hearsay.
What was Mr. Trump's reaction?
That's absolutely hearsay.
Public at that time, and was he concerned about the impact of that video on the election?
The answer is yes. As I stated before, I was in London at the time visiting my daughter who was studying there.
Trump's finances with all this, that has nothing to do with anything.
And I received a phone call during the dinner from Hope Hicks stating that she had just spoken to Mr. Trump. And
total liabilities and net worth is $5 million.
The various different
net worth $8 million.
That you have relationships with. And we need to spin this. And what we want to do is just to claim that this was men locker room talk.
I doubt that that's all he has. Total assets, $9 million. That don't seem right to me. A real estate mogul only has $9 million in assets.
At the same time, and then on top of that, the Stormy Daniels matter.
Yeah, and these things happen.
That doesn't sound right at all.
Before the election, and almost one after the other. The Stormy Daniels revelation, where prosecutors and officials, prosecutors learned of that matter. And prosecutors stated that the officials at the magazine contacted you about the story, and the magazine, of course, is the National Enquiry. Is that correct, that they did?
Yes, ma'am.
Come to you. Were you concerned about this news story becoming public right after the Access Hollywood study in terms of impact on the election?
I was concerned about it, but more importantly, Mr. Trump was concerned about it.
That was my next question. What was the president's concern about these matters becoming public in October as we were about to go into an election?
I don't think anybody would dispute this belief that after the wild fire that encompassed the Billy Bush tape, that a second follow-up to it would have been pleasant. And he was concerned with the effect that it had had on the campaign, on how women were seeing him, and ultimately whether or not he would have a shot in the general election.
And so you negotiated the $130,000 payment.
The $130,000 number was not a number that was actually negotiated. It was told to me by Keith Davidson that this is a number that Ms. Clifford wanted.
Well, you finally completed that deal, as it were, on October the 25th, days before the election. What happened in the interim?
Contemplated whether or not to do it. Wasn't sure if she was really going to go public. There was, again, some communications back and forth between myself and Keith Davidson. And ultimately, it came to either do it or don't. at which time, again, I had gone into Mr. Trump's office, as I did after each and every conversation.
So they're talking about
friends, and it's 130,000.
they're talking about
and we should just do it. So go ahead.
What's her name?
And I was at
the
in Weisselberg, where he directed
prostitute, pretty or the entertainer
Weisselberg's office, and
that they paid off for $130,000. My question is, why did they need to pay her $130,000 to be quiet?
You know Lynn Patton?
Yes, I do.
I asked Lynn to come today in her personal capacity.
There's no reason to pay somebody to be quiet if you haven't done anything wrong, first of all.
I'm responsible for Lynn Patton.
Second of all, he hired an entertainer and had sex with her, and
well, I'm glad you acknowledged.
In a sense, that is prostitution.
Very demeaning comments about the president that Miss Patton doesn't.
But however, paying her off to be quiet means that when he was running for president, he was afraid that somebody was going to use that against him in the campaign, and that she would let the Dems know either way.
How do you reconcile the two of those?
Either way, she was going to make money off of it, whether it was from Trump or whether it was from the Democrats. She was going to make money off of it.
I guess what I'm saying is I've talked to the president over 300 times. I've not heard one time a racist comment.
And she saw an opportunity and threw a fucking fit. She threw a fit that she had a gag order on her.
No, sir.
And because
that's also not true, sir.
The guy that hired her 10 years ago or longer is now running for president, and she couldn't tell that story to make money off of it.
I've heard it's over 200 times.
No, I don't think. I think it's approximately about 100, from what I recall. But I would ask you, you ask me a question, sir.
Do you have proof? Do you have proof? Yes or no?
I do.
That, in a sense, is blackmail, kind of. I mean, no, she didn't blackmail him, but
who are black are executives at the Trump organization, and the answer is zero.
Mr. Cohen, we can go through this.
I mean, call it split hairs if you want. I mean, either way it goes, Stormy Daniels wanted to make money off of her encounter with Trump. Either way.
$2 million or so from Novartis.
I did.
For access to.
And she signed in a sense, a gag order to not say anything. And a judge lifted that gag order because the judge said it was wrong, but
so they paid.
Sir, please let me finish.
No, did they pay you 1.2?
But that was that was a contract between two private citizens, and a judge has no authorization or cannot undo that contract.
And they believed that I had a value.
So how many times did you meet with them?
Was the insight that I was capable of offering them.
How many times?
They were willing to pay.
How many times did you meet with them?
It's not like it was a business contract. It was a private contract between two citizens.
Whenever they needed.
How many times? Yes, sir. That's a question, Mr.
And when it comes to that, a judge rarely gets involved between that. They can, but they'll always side with the person that got the contract. And second of all, why the judge decided to do that,
it's not a Bank of Kazakhstan,
even though the contract was legit, is beyond me.
I did.
That must have been a judge that did not like the president, I'm guessing.
Absconded with it was between $4 to $6 billion, and some of that money was here in the United States, and they sought my assistance.
See, like the check that's on screen right now,
that money and helping them to recollect it.
So
that $35,000, it does not state what that $35,000 is for.
It's over $4 million.
And Trump or Michael Cohen can say, well, whatever, it don't matter what that is.
Nice guy.
Well, I am a nice guy, but
it could be for 4 pounds or 4 pounds of cocaine. It could be for $35,000 worth of weed. It could be for 27 top-notch hookers.
Novartis sent me their contract, which stated specifically that they wanted me to lobby.
You know, they're showing those checks. Those checks don't mean anything if there's no proof to where they went.
By me, initialed and written in my own handwriting, says, I will not lobby or do government relations work.
And that's the part they're not showing you. They're not showing you the part to where those checks went.
Registered lobbyists, so you disagree with that?
I don't know what they said, sir.
That wouldn't stand up in court as evidence. But as I said, this is the Senate. This is not.
Advocate on behalf of any.
This is not a real court.
Any of your contracts.
And how they're going to send somebody to jail, how the Senate can send somebody to jail, I don't know. Like I said, I'm going to look into that.
I don't know what you.
I'm sure the Senate has a judge on standby because a judge has to issue that order. The Senate cannot issue that order. They don't have the power to send somebody to jail. None of those people on that panel are judges.
One reason, and that's the American people are tired of being lied to. They have been lied to by President Trump. They've been lied to by the president's children. They have been lied to by the president's legal representatives. And it pains me to say that
they've been lied to by everybody, including, I'm sure, William Lacey Clay.
Who are still devoted.
I'm sure he's lied. I'm sure all the Republicans lied. If you are a senator, you lie. If you work for the government, you lie. It doesn't matter who it is.
Assets. Since by law,
it's come to my attention that when something is brought out to the public, there's usually an agenda behind it. It's not because it's right or wrong.
Cohen, you served for nearly a decade as
of course, that's what they'll say. It has to do with right or wrong, but it's not. They don't care about right or wrong. They do wrong things every day.
Have an understanding of the president.
It's because they have agenda. It's because of their own agenda. Usually there's money behind it.
In November of 2017,
so right now, you have all these people, watching this, and the next question is going to be asked is, where's Mueller's report, which was supposed to come out sometime this week, actually, and it's not supposed to come out publicly, but it's supposed to go to the Senate. And after the Michael Cohen, it just so happens that after Michael Cohen talked to the FBI the past 2 weeks, the Mueller
everything was done.
Mueller ended the investigation after they talked to Michael Cohen. That's odd.
What purpose did it serve?
It depends upon the situation. There were times that I was asked, again with Alan Weisselberg, the CFO, to go back and to speak with an individual from Forbes, because Mr. Trump wanted each year to have his...
I don't believe anything any of these people say.
Forbes wealthiest individuals list.
My political affiliation has nothing to do with this case whatsoever. I just call it like I see it, and that's what I'm going to do.
For example, 40 Wall Street, which is about 1.2 million square
feet. I support our president either way. No matter who our president is, if he's a president of the United States and he's not a communist or a dictator, I'm going to support him.
Or if you're going off of your rent roll, you can go by the gross rent roll times a multiple, and you make up the multiple, which is something that he had talked about. It's based upon what he wanted to value the asset at.
This is almost like Richard Nixon all over again.
Provided this committee with copies of the president's financial statements or parts of them from 2011, 2012, and 13. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit those for the record. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit the statements to the record.
Without objection's order.
Thank you. Can you explain why you...
Just to let you know, I don't know how far this is going to go on for.
These financial statements.
YouTube usually after about 2 hours and 15 minutes or so, it'll start recording over itself. So you may not get the first. You may not get the first 15 minutes of the front half of this, which sucks.
Was when we were dealing later on with insurance companies, we would provide them with copies so that they would understand that the premium, which is based sometimes upon the individual's capabilities to pay, would be reduced.
Yeah, we're already past. We're positive.
All of this was done at the president's direction and with his knowledge?
Yes, because whatever the numbers would come back to be, we would immediately report.
Yeah, that sucks. So we're recording over ourselves, but we'll, you know, I'm gonna go back into the live stream. I'm gonna stop it and go back into the live stream so it don't.
These numbers are inflated.
So it doesn't record over itself. So I'll be right back.